The envelope shouldn't have made it past intake. Iria Knox pressed her spine against cold concrete, staring at cream-colored paper that didn't belong in a place built from rust and rage. Federal Penitentiary, 44, maximum security. Alpha classification meant suppressants every morning, solitary every night, and silence that crushed harder than the bars. She'd been inside for 3 years. No visitors, no calls. No family left who'd claim her. The letter sat on her bunk like a question she didn't want to answer. Around her, steel doors slammed in rhythm. Guards barked numbers instead of names. The air tasted like bleach and sweat, and something metallic that never washed out. She'd learned to breathe through her mouth, to keep her eyes down, to let the alpha instincts starve until they stopped clawing at her ribs. But the letter changed the math. Iria picked it up. The handwriting was clean, measured. Every letter formed with the kind of control that took practice. I don't know who you were before the headlines, but I know what it feels like to be reduced to a single version of yourself. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. She read it twice, 3 times, searching for the angle, the trap, the transaction hidden between the lines. In here, kindness didn't exist without cost. Someone wanted something. They always did. The signature sat at the bottom in ink that hadn't smudged. Rowan Vale Iria folded the letter once, then slid it under her thin mattress. She didn't respond, didn't acknowledge, didn't let herself wonder why a stranger would write to a woman the courts called expendable. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds that never stopped. Footsteps on metal. Coughing that turned wet. Someone crying 3 cells down who'd learned that noise only made things worse. The second letter arrived 4 days later. Too fast. Mail took weeks to process, longer to approve. But there it was, slipped through the slot during morning count, landing on the floor like it had bypassed every system designed to keep the outside world outside. Iria's hands didn't shake when she opened it, but her pulse kicked hard enough to bruise. You didn't write back. I understand. Trust is expensive where you are. But I'm not asking for it yet. I'm asking if you remember what it felt like to protect someone. The words hit like a fist to the sternum. Sharp, precise. Aimed at the part of her she'd tried to bury. Because she did remember. She remembered the weight of a child's hand in hers. Remembered standing between violence and innocence. Remembered the choice that ended with blood on her knuckles, and a sentence that wouldn't expire until she was too old to matter. Rowan Vale wrote like someone who already knew the answer. Iria sat on the edge of her bunk, letter clutched tight enough to wrinkle the paper. The question wasn't whether to respond anymore. It was whether this stranger was offering salvation or something worse. She pulled out the single sheet of paper inmates were allowed per week. Wrote 3 sentences, nothing warm, nothing that could be used against her later. I protected someone once. It cost me everything. Why do you care? The reply came in 2 days. Because I'm looking for women who pay the price anyway. Iria stared at those words until lights out, until the darkness pressed close, and the letter became just another shape she couldn't see, but couldn't forget. Rowan Vale wasn't asking about her crime. She was asking about her character. And somehow that felt more dangerous than anything the courts had done. The next letter arrived with a question that made Iria's breath catch. Do you protect anyone inside? Would you answer a stranger's question if it could cost you everything? The rec yard smelled like dirt and desperation. Iria kept her distance from the clusters of women who'd learned to survive by forming packs. Alphas stuck together. Betas kept their heads down. Omegas moved in shadows, trying not to draw attention from anyone who'd use them to settle scores. She didn't fit anywhere. The guards called her compliant. The inmates called her cold. Nobody called her by name. Vale's letter sat folded in her pocket, the question burning through fabric. Do you protect anyone inside? The truth was complicated. Iria leaned against chain-link fence, watching clouds move too slow to matter. She'd written back 3 times now, short answers, guarded, testing to see when the stranger would ask for something real. But our Vale never asked about the case, never pushed for details about the bodies or the trial or the headlines that called her a monster. Instead, she asked about control, about what it took to be an alpha in a cage designed to break them, about the rage that had nowhere to go except inward. It felt like being studied, like someone was taking measurements for a purpose Iria couldn't see yet. The latest letter had been different, longer. Our Vale mentioned Omega families on the East Coast. Displacement. Like children who slipped through systems built to fail them. She wrote about volunteering at shelters, about pups raised without protection, about the kind of violence that happened when no one was watching. She wrote like someone who understood power but didn't worship it. And then she'd asked the question that sat in Iria's pocket like a loaded gun. A whistle blew, rec time ending. Women shuffled toward the building in lines that never straightened, shoulders hunched against wind that cut through cotton uniforms. Iria moved with them, eyes forward, hands visible, the rhythm she'd learned to survive. But her mind stayed on the letter, because the answer was yes. She did protect someone inside. She just hadn't figured out how to admit it without exposing the only soft thing left in a place designed to harden everything it touched. That night, Iria pulled out her weekly paper, stared at the blank space. The overhead light flickered, casting shadows that moved like living things. She wrote carefully, each word chosen, each sentence stripped of anything that could be twisted. There's a child here, 6 years old, Omega. She shouldn't be in this place. I keep her breathing. That's all I can do. She folded the letter before she could second-guess it, slid it into the outgoing mail slot, felt something shift in her chest that might have been relief or might have been the first crack in armor she couldn't afford to lose. Our Vale's response arrived faster than physics should allow. The envelope was heavier this time. Inside, the letter was brief, controlled. But underneath the words, Iria sensed something sharp and deliberate, like a blade testing resistance. Now, you're doing more than keeping her breathing. You're teaching her that protection exists. That matters more than you know. Beneath the letter, wrapped in tissue paper that had no business passing inspection, were 3 items. Crayons, primary colors, unbroken. A blanket, soft, small enough for a child. A picture book with wolves on the cover. Not the kind that devoured, the kind that guarded. Iria's hands shook, because none of this should have made it through intake. Not the weight, not the contents, not the fact that someone on the outside had enough reach to bend rules that didn't bend. She sat on her bunk, holding items that didn't belong in her world, and felt the full weight of what she'd just confirmed. Our Vale didn't just write letters. She moved institutions. She had power, real power, on the kind that reshaped systems from the outside, while everyone inside kept pretending the walls were solid. Iria folded the blanket, hid the crayons, kept the book close enough to see. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt something worse than fear. She felt hope, which meant she had something to lose again. What would you risk for someone who can break rules you thought were unbreakable? Solace didn't speak the first time Iria saw her. The girl sat in the corner of the common area, knees pulled to her chest, eyes tracking movement like prey that had learned to calculate distance. 6 years old. Omega, wearing a uniform that hung off her frame like borrowed skin. She'd been brought in 2 weeks ago after her Alpha Guardian disappeared during a failed raid. The system labeled her temporary, prison labor labeled her useful. The women inside labeled her target. Because Omegas without protection were currency in places where power was the only thing that mattered. Iria had watched from a distance, told herself it wasn't her problem. She had 3 years left on her sentence if she kept her head down. 3 years until she could walk out and try to remember what freedom tasted like. But then she saw the shove. An older beta, serving life for something that showed in her eyes, pushed Solace toward the floor. Not hard enough to break bones, just hard enough to establish hierarchy, to remind a child that kindness was a lie people told on the outside. The girl hit concrete, didn't cry, just pulled herself smaller. Iria moved before thought caught up. She stepped between them, didn't touch the beta, didn't raise her voice. Just stood there with the kind of stillness that alphas recognized as warning. The beta backed off, muttered something about it not being worth it, walked away before guards noticed the tension pulling tight. Solace looked up at Iria with eyes too old for her face, and didn't say a word. That silence cost Iria. The beta reported the interference, claimed Iria had threatened her. Guards didn't care about truth in a place built on managed violence. They cared about paperwork and quota, and making sure alphas remembered their place. Iria spent 5 days in solitary. Concrete walls, no light. No sound except her own breathing and the thoughts that got louder when there was nothing to drown them out. Her knuckles were still purple when she got out, but Solace was waiting. The girl didn't approach, didn't speak, just positioned herself within eyesight during rec time, sat 3 tables away during meals, slept in a bunk where Iria could see her if she turned her head. Trust without words. Faith that made alphas dangerous. Iria started paying attention, noticed who looked at Solace too long, who moved too close, who tested boundaries to see if protection was real or performance. She kept her interventions subtle. A look, a shift in position, the kind of presence that said, "Not this one," without needing translation. It worked until it didn't. Night came fast in prison, lights out at 9. Silence enforced by guards who'd rather sleep than patrol. Darkness that pressed close and swallowed sound. Iria stayed awake. She'd learned to track rhythms, footsteps that belonged, breathing patterns that shifted when someone was pretending. The small sounds that meant violence was moving through shadows. She heard it at 2 a.m., soft steps, too careful, heading toward the section where younger inmates slept. Iria rolled out of her bunk, moved through darkness she'd memorized, found 2 women standing over Solace's bed, hands reaching. She didn't think. Grabbed the nearest one by the collar, slammed her against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The second one swung. Iria blocked, countered, felt knuckles split against bone. Guards came running. Lights exploded overhead. Sirens screamed. Iria ended up on the floor, face pressed to concrete, zip ties cutting circulation, blood in her mouth that might have been hers. But Solace was breathing, and that was all that mattered. They gave Iria 14 days in solitary that time, broken knuckles, bruised ribs, a darkness so complete it felt like drowning. When she got out, Solace was sitting on Iria's bunk. The girl held something in small hands, extended it without speaking. It was a drawing, crayons on paper, 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing together, no words needed. Iria took the drawing, folded it carefully, put it in the same place she kept R. Vale's letters, because some things were worth protecting, even when the cost kept rising. How much would you sacrifice for someone who can't protect themselves? The lockdown came without warning. Iria was in the yard when sirens started screaming. Red lights strobed against concrete. Guards shouted orders that contradicted each other. Women scattered like startled birds, some running for cover, others standing frozen. Standard protocol was movement. Get to your cell, get on the floor, wait for all clear. But Iria's instincts were sharper than procedure. She scanned the chaos, counted bodies, tracked faces. Solace wasn't in the yard. The girl had been assigned laundry duty that morning. Interior building, east wing, too far to reach before doors sealed. Iria moved toward the entrance. A guard blocked her path, told her to get down. She dropped to her knees but kept her eyes up, watching the building swallow women in waves. The doors slammed shut, magnetic locks engaged, the kind that didn't open until someone on the outside decided inmates were safe. Except nothing about this felt safe. Iria pressed her forehead to concrete, tried to slow her heartbeat, tried to convince herself that Solace was fine, that laundry duty was probably the safest place during lockdown, that panic was useless. Then the lights went out. As complete darkness, no emergency backup, no generator kicking in, just sudden, absolute black. It lasted 38 seconds. Iria counted. When power returned, the yard was different. Women were being herded inside faster. Guards had weapons drawn. The air tasted like fear and something chemical. She got to her cell. Door slammed behind her, locks engaged. And then she heard it, faint, distant, muffled by walls and metal, and the sound of her own pulse thundering, a child crying. Solace. Iria stood at her cell door, hands pressed to steel, listening to terror she couldn't reach. The crying stopped after 2 minutes. Either someone comforted her, or someone silenced her. Iria didn't sleep that night, stood at the small window in her cell door. Watched shadows move through corridors. Listened to whispers that traveled through ventilation. By morning, the stories had already started. Someone tried to grab the Omega kid during the blackout. Someone with access to schedules. Someone who knew exactly where she'd be when lights went out. Someone who moved through systems like they owned them. The attempt failed. Guards intervened. Or maybe luck intervened. Details shifted depending on who told it, but Solace was alive. That was confirmed during breakfast count. Iria saw her across the cafeteria. The girl looked smaller, pale. She wasn't eating, just staring at food like she'd forgotten what it was for. Their eyes met. Solace's expression didn't change, but she nodded. Once. Small. A confirmation that she was breathing, that Iria's protection hadn't failed yet. The letter arrived that afternoon, different from the others, shorter, the handwriting tighter, like R. Vale had written it fast. I didn't anticipate interference, but I will not abandon her. No warmth, no apology. Just cold acknowledgement that someone had moved against them, against Solace, against whatever plan our Vale had been building through letters and gifts and questions that measured Iria's character. Iria read the letter 3 times, then burned it in the toilet, flushed the ashes, watched evidence disappear. Because she understood now. Our Vale wasn't just watching. She was orchestrating, and someone else had noticed. 2 days later, another letter came. This one had a symbol stamped in red wax at the bottom, a fractured crown marked by claw lines. Iria's blood went cold. She knew that mark. Every alpha who'd survived the underworld knew it. It belonged to the most dangerous woman on the East Coast. It belonged to Rowan Vale. What happens when you realize the stranger helping you is more dangerous than the prison holding you? The symbol stared up at Iria like accusation. She sat on her bunk, door closed, surrounded by concrete and silence, and the sudden understanding that everything she'd believed was wrong. Rowan Vale. The name carried weight in places polite society didn't acknowledge. Philanthropist, reformer, the woman who funded Omega shelters and prison education programs, who smiled for cameras and signed checks that changed lives. But underneath the headlines lived something sharper. Rowan Vale ran the most disciplined syndicate on the East Coast. Not the loudest, not the most violent, but the one that moved through systems like water through cracks, the one that dismantled traffickers, erased abusive alphas, and reclaimed pups the world abandoned. She didn't rule through chaos. She ruled through precision. And she'd been writing letters to Iria for 2 months, measuring her, testing her, preparing her for something Iria still couldn't see. The current letter was longer than the others, written in the same controlled hand, but with an edge that cut deeper. You know who I am now. Good. Deception was temporary necessity. I needed to see if you were what I suspected. An alpha who chose mercy when violence was easier. An alpha who protected the vulnerable even when it cost everything. An alpha who refused to execute a child. That last line hit like a bullet, because it was true. Iria had been part of a syndicate once. Different organization, different city, same brutality. She'd been good at her job, efficient, reliable. Now the kind of enforcer who didn't ask questions and didn't leave witnesses. Until the night her boss ordered her to kill a rival alpha's pup. 7 years old. Omega. Trembling in a basement that smelled like mold and terror. Iria had looked at that child and seen Solace before Solace existed. She'd refused. Her boss called it weakness, called it betrayal, called it proof that female alphas who questioned orders were liabilities that needed removing. They didn't kill her. They did something worse. They framed her, planted evidence, made sure the court saw her as the monster they needed her to be. Prison wasn't justice. It was disposal. Rowan's letter continued. I've been watching that choice ripple for 3 years. Watching you survive without becoming what they said you were. That watching you protect Solace, the way you protected that other child. I don't need weapons, Iria. I need women who understand that real power is restraint. Who know when to strike and when to shield. Who can operate in darkness without becoming it. The offer came next. Clean, direct, inevitable. When you're free, you work for me. You protect the vulnerable. You enforce discipline. You help me build something better than what's burning. Or you stay where you are while others decide Solace's fate. It wasn't a threat. It was reality. Because Solace had been targeted during the blackout. Because someone knew she mattered to Iria. Because vulnerability was currency, and protection was the only thing standing between a child and oblivion. Iria read the letter until the words blurred. She thought about the 3 years she'd spent convinced her life was over. About the silence that had replaced her name. About the future that looked like concrete and aging and eventual irrelevance. And she thought about Solace. About the way the girl looked at her like trust was still possible. Like protection wasn't a fairy tale. Like alphas could be something other than predators. Iria pulled out her paper. Wrote 2 sentences. I'm in. What happens next? The response came in 18 hours. Next, we get you out. And then we teach them what calculated mercy looks like. Iria folded the letter. Put it with the others. Felt the weight of a decision that couldn't be undone. She'd agreed to work for the most dangerous woman on the East Coast. She'd bound herself to a syndicate that operated in shadows. She'd traded one prison for another. But this time she'd chosen the bars. And somehow that made all the difference. Would you join the Mafia if it meant saving the one person who still believed in you? The transfer paperwork appeared 3 days later. Iria stood in the warden's office, hands cuffed behind her back, staring at documents that rewrote her future in bureaucratic language. Early release, conditional parole. Sponsorship by a registered non-profit organization dedicated to alpha rehabilitation. Every word was a lie wrapped in legality. The warden didn't look at her, just slid the papers across his desk like they burned his fingers. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed on something past her shoulder. He was afraid, not of Iria, of whoever had made this happen. She signed where he pointed, watched him witness the signature with hands that trembled just enough to notice. He processed her out in silence. No speeches about second chances, no warnings about reoffending. Just paperwork and stamps, and the mechanical efficiency of a man who knew better than to ask questions. 2 guards escorted her to processing. They stripped her of prison uniform, returned clothes she'd been wearing 3 years ago, jeans that didn't fit anymore, a shirt that smelled like storage and regret. She dressed in silence, accepted an envelope with $43 and a bus voucher. Standard release package for inmates with nowhere to go. But Iria wasn't taking a bus. A woman waited in the parking lot. Mid-30s, beta, professional suit, earpiece barely visible. She stood next to a black sedan with windows too dark to see through. She nodded once when Iria emerged. No introduction, no small talk. Just opened the rear door and waited. Iria hesitated, looked back at the prison. Grey walls, razor wire. The place that had held her while the world kept turning. She'd survived 3 years inside those walls. Now she had to survive what came next. She got in the car, the door closed, locks engaged. The woman drove without speaking. Highway stretched ahead. Miles of freedom Iria had forgotten how to navigate. 30 minutes into the drive, the woman spoke. "Solace is waiting." 3 words that changed Iria's breathing. Because it meant the girl was safe. Meant Rowan had kept her promise. Meant protection hadn't ended when Iria signed her name to a deal she didn't fully understand. The car turned off the highway, took back roads through neighborhoods that got nicer the farther they drove. Trees replaced concrete. Space replaced density. The kind of quiet that only existed when money built walls high enough to keep the world out. They stopped in front of a house that didn't look like a safe house. Colonial architecture, manicured lawn. The kind of place where people raised families and hosted barbecues and pretended violence was something that happened elsewhere. The woman opened Iria's door. "2nd floor, 3rd door on the right." Iria climbed steps that didn't creak. Walked hallways that smelled like lavender instead of bleach. Found the door already open. Solace sat on a bed too big for her small frame. Clean clothes, brushed hair, holding the picture book with wolves on the cover. She looked up when Iria entered. And smiled. Not big, not dramatic. Just a small curve of lips that said, "You came back without needing words." Iria sat on the edge of the bed. Didn't touch. Didn't push. Just existed in the same space while her heart tried to remember how to beat normally. "You're safe now," she said. The first words she'd spoken to the girl in 3 weeks. Solace nodded, reached out, took Iria's hand. Trust without hesitation. Faith that alphas could keep promises. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Measured, deliberate. The kind of presence that announced itself without needing introduction. Rowan Vale stepped into the doorway. In person, she was different from what Iria had imagined. Smaller, sharper. Authority wrapped in tailored clothes and perfect posture. Eyes that tracked everything and revealed nothing. She looked at Solace first, then at Iria. "We need to talk," Rowan said. Not a request. She led Iria to an office downstairs. Closed the door, poured 2 glasses of water. Then set one in front of Iria without asking if she wanted it. "You understand what you agreed to," Rowan said. Statement, not question. Iria nodded. "Then understand this. The Black Meridian knows about Solace. They know she matters to you. They'll use that. They'll test you. They'll wait for the moment you're weakest and strike exactly there." Rowan sat behind a desk made of dark wood. Hands folded, expression calm. "I don't tolerate weakness in my organization, but I respect loyalty. You protected Solace when it cost you everything. That tells me you understand sacrifice. Now I need to know if you understand strategy." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs. Women. Different ages, different backgrounds. All marked with red circles. "These are targets," Rowan said. "Abusive alphas, traffickers. Women who prey on the vulnerable. Your job is simple. Find them. Stop them. Use whatever force is necessary." Iria looked at the faces, memorized features, felt something old and sharp wake up inside her chest. "And Solace," she asked, "stays here, protected, educated, given the childhood she deserves." Rowan stood, walked to the window, looked out at grounds that stretched like promises. "You work for me now, Iria. That means you follow orders, you trust my judgment, you operate in darkness without becoming it." She turned, met Iria's eyes. "Can you do that?" Iria thought about the 3 years she'd spent in a cage, about the child upstairs who smiled like trust was still possible, about the choice she'd made that ended one life and started another. "Yes," she said. Rowan smiled, small, controlled. "Good, because tomorrow we move Solace to a secure location, and the Black Meridian will try to stop us." "What price would you pay to protect the innocent in a world built on violence?" The convoy left at dawn, 3 vehicles, black, identical, windows reinforced, routes planned to avoid cameras and choke points. Solace rode in the middle car with Rowan. Iria took the rear vehicle with 2 other alphas she didn't know, women who moved like soldiers and spoke in single words. The plan was simple: drive 2 hours north, deliver Solace to a facility designed for displaced Omega children, trained staff, secure perimeter. The kind of place where nightmares couldn't reach. 15 minutes into the drive, Iria's instincts started screaming. The lead car took a turn that wasn't on the route. Too sharp, too sudden. Like the driver reacted to something, instead of following procedure. She leaned forward, tapped the shoulder of the woman driving her vehicle. "Something's wrong." The woman's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. She saw it the same moment Iria did. A 4th car, dark sedan. Following too close. They'd been compromised. The radio crackled, Rowan's voice, calm, precise. "Evasive protocol, now." The convoy accelerated, took side streets, burned through intersections, tried to lose the tail through speed and unpredictability. But the 4th car matched them, turn for turn. Like the driver knew exactly where they'd go, because someone had leaked the route. Someone inside Rowan's organization had sold them out. The ambush came on a stretch of road with nowhere to run. 2 vehicles blocked the path ahead. Armed women stepped out. Not police. Not federal. Just professionals with weapons and orders. The Black Meridian. Rowan's voice came through the radio again. Different tone. Colder. "Protect the asset. Lethal force authorized." Iria's door opened. She stepped out, felt pavement under boots, felt adrenaline sharpen everything into crystal clarity. The woman leading the ambush was tall, alpha, scarred. She smiled like violence was entertainment. "Hand over the pup," she said. "Walk away. Nobody dies today." Rowan emerged from the middle vehicle, stood in the space between threat and protection, didn't draw a weapon, didn't raise her voice. "You're making a mistake," she said. The scarred woman laughed. "The only mistake is thinking you control this city." She raised her hand. Signal. Gunfire erupted. Iria moved on instinct, grabbed the woman next to her, pulled her behind the vehicle, felt bullets punch metal, heard glass shatter. She looked toward the middle car, saw Rowan crouched low, saw movement inside. Solace. The girl was pressed to the floor, hands over her ears, eyes squeezed shut. Iria ran, didn't think, didn't calculate, just moved through chaos toward the only thing that mattered. She reached the middle car, yanked the door open, reached for Solace. The explosion came from the left. Concussive force. Heat. Sound that turned the world into ringing silence. Iria felt herself lifted, thrown. Hit pavement hard enough to crack ribs. Vision blurred, ears screamed. She tasted copper and smoke. Hands grabbed her, dragged her, she fought, kicked, tried to get back to Solace. Someone hit her, hard, across the temple. Darkness swallowed everything. She woke chained to a hospital bed. Eyes white ceiling, fluorescent lights, smell of antiseptic and fear. Pain radiated from her ribs. Every breath felt like broken glass. Her head throbbed where they'd struck her, but she was alive. The door opened. Rowan walked in, no visible injuries, suit perfect, expression unreadable. She stood at the foot of the bed, looked at Iria with eyes that measured damage. "You shielded her," Rowan said quietly. 3 broken ribs, concussion, shrapnel in your shoulder, but you kept her breathing. Iria's voice came out rough, torn. "Where is she?" Rowan's expression shifted, just slightly, enough to confirm Iria's worst fear. "Gone." The word hit harder than the explosion. They took her during the chaos, professional extraction. They knew exactly when to move. Iria tried to sit up. Pain exploded, chains rattled. "I have to." "You have to heal," Rowan interrupted, "so you're useful when we get her back." She moved closer, leaned down, voice dropping to something sharp and lethal. "The Black Meridian thinks they've won. They think taking Solace gives them leverage. They think female alphas will negotiate." Rowan's smile was cold. "They're wrong. How far would you go to save the child who trusts you with her life?" Rowan signed the discharge papers herself. No doctors, no questions, just authority that moved through institutions like ownership. Iria sat on the edge of the hospital bed, ribs taped, shoulder bandaged, pain meds turning the world soft at the edges. But her mind stayed sharp, because Solace was out there, scared, alone, in the hands of women who traded children like currency. Rowan helped her into a wheelchair. Not gentle, not rough, just efficient. "Can you walk?" she asked. Iria nodded, stood, felt the world tilt, steadied herself against the bed frame. Rowan watched, evaluating, measuring. "Good, because we move in 2 hours." They took a private elevator to the roof. A helicopter waited, blades already spinning, wind that tore at clothes and stole sound. Iria climbed in, strapped herself into a seat that vibrated with engine power, watched the city drop away beneath them. Rowan sat across from her, headset on, talking to people Iria couldn't hear. The flight lasted 40 minutes. They landed on the roof of a building downtown, glass and steel, the kind of corporate tower where deals happened in conference rooms and violence stayed theoretical. Rowan led her inside, down hallways that smelled like money and power, into a room filled with screens and women who moved with military precision. A war room. Maps covered the walls, photographs, red lines connecting locations. Digital surveillance feeds showing streets and buildings, and people who didn't know they were being watched. Rowan stood at the center, removed her jacket, rolled up her sleeves. Authority without performance. "The Black Meridian operates out of 3 locations," she said, voice carrying to every corner. "Warehouses, modified for holding and processing. We've been tracking their supply lines for 6 months." She pointed to a screen. Building blueprints appeared. "Solace is here, 3rd location, industrial district, heavy security. They're expecting retaliation." Rowan turned, looked at the women assembled. "So we give them something they don't expect. Precision over chaos. Strategy over rage." She looked at Iria. "You know this building. You worked security there 2 years ago, before your arrest." Iria's blood went cold, because she did know it, remembered the layout, the blind spots, the vulnerabilities she'd been hired to protect. "They're using your old employer's territory," Rowan continued. "Ironic, but useful." She pulled up schematics, marked entry points. You go in first, alone. They'll recognize you. They'll assume you're there to negotiate. Rowan's eyes held Iria's. But you're not negotiating. You're confirming Solace's location, you're mapping their response pattern, and you're creating the opening we need. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Iria thought about the girl who drew pictures in crayon, who trusted that protection was real, who smiled like hope wasn't stupid. When do I leave? She asked. Rowan checked her watch. 90 minutes. The preparation happened fast. New clothes, concealed comm device, weapons she could reach without telegraphing movement. Rowan walked her through contingencies, backup positions, extraction protocols if everything collapsed. But they both knew the truth. If this went wrong, Iria wasn't walking out. Before she left, Rowan stopped her, hand on her arm, first physical contact that wasn't functional. You bled for her once, Rowan said quietly. I need you alive to do it again. Something passed between them. Recognition, respect, the kind of understanding that only existed between alphas who'd learned that power meant responsibility. Iria nodded. Rowan released her arm, and then alarms started screaming. Every screen in the war room turned red, feeds cut to black. Emergency protocols activated. One of the women shouted over the chaos. Breach! Someone's inside our network! Rowan moved to the main console, fingers flying across keyboards, expression locked in concentration. The screens flickered. Came back online, a message displayed across every monitor. We have the pup. Come alone, or she dies screaming. An address appeared below the words. Different location. Not the warehouse they'd been planning for. Somewhere else. Somewhere Iria didn't recognize. Rowan stared at the screen, jaw tight, hands steady. She turned, looked at Iria. It's a trap. I know, Iria said. They'll kill you. Maybe. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Calculation. Strategy. The weight of decisions that lived in shadows. Then we make sure you're worth killing for. Would you walk into certain death if it meant one chance to save her? The building was abandoned, windows broken, graffiti claiming walls, the kind of place where the city forgot to care. Iria entered alone, no backup, no weapons visible. Just her and the comm device Rowan had insisted she wear. The interior smelled like decay and old violence. Concrete floors, empty rooms, echoes that made every footstep sound like company. She found Solace on the 3rd floor. The girl sat in a chair, hands bound, tape across her mouth, eyes wide with terror that tried to hide as relief when she saw Iria. 4 women surrounded her, armed, alert, the kind of professionals who didn't make mistakes. The scarred alpha from the ambush stepped forward. You came, she said, sounded almost impressed. Iria kept her hands visible, voice calm. Let her go. Why would I do that? Because I'm the one you want, not her. The scarred woman smiled. You're right, but leverage is leverage, and Rowan Vale values this pup more than she should. She moved closer, studied Iria like a specimen. You know what's funny? You used to work for us. Before you went soft, before you refused an order and ended up in a cage. Iria said nothing. And now you work for Vale, another syndicate, another set of orders. You really think you're protecting anyone? You're just a weapon who changed hands. The words landed, sharp, true enough to sting. But Iria had learned something in prison. Weapons chose their targets. She moved, fast, precise. Years of training compressed into seconds. Grabbed the nearest guard, used her as a shield. More felt bullets punched the body she held. Dropped low, swept the next guard's legs. Chaos erupted, gunfire, shouting, movement too fast to track. Iria reached Solace, ripped the tape off, cut the bindings with a blade she'd hidden in her sleeve. Run, she said. The girl hesitated. Run! Solace ran. The scarred Alpha caught Iria from behind, slammed her against the wall. Pain exploded through her injured ribs. "You're dead!" the woman hissed. Then the windows exploded inward. Glass, smoke, bodies dropping from ropes. Rowan's team. They moved like choreography, precise, lethal. Professionals who didn't waste movement. The scarred Alpha released Iria, turned to face the new threat. Rowan Vale stepped through the broken window, gun raised, expression carved from ice. "Bad decision," she said. She pulled the trigger. As the fight lasted 3 minutes, bodies hit the floor. Survivors fled. The Black Meridian's trap became their tomb. Rowan crossed the room, checked Iria's injuries with hands that knew exactly where to press. "You'll live," she said. "Solace. Safe. My people have her." Rowan pulled Iria to her feet, steadied her when pain made standing difficult. "This isn't over," Rowan said. "The Black Meridian won't forgive this. They'll retaliate. They'll come at us harder." She looked at Iria. Really looked. "But they'll learn something tonight. Female alphas who protect the vulnerable don't negotiate. We don't hesitate. We don't show mercy to those who target children." Rowan's hand stayed on Iria's arm. Support, connection. "Welcome to the war, Iria. I hope you're ready." Outside, helicopters descended. Extraction, cleanup, the machinery of power operating in shadows while the city slept. Rowan signed documents on a tablet someone handed her. Release papers, transfer orders, legal magic that erased Iria's parole restrictions. She was free, really free, bound only by the choice she'd made. When freedom costs everything you were, is it still freedom? Solace slept in the back of the helicopter, curled in a seat too big for her small body, blanket wrapped tight, breathing steady. Iria watched her from across the cabin, counted each breath, made sure they kept coming. Rowan sat beside her, silent, focused on screens that showed the city shrinking beneath them. They landed on private property, estate, walls, security that didn't advertise itself. Rowan carried Solace inside, laid her in a bed designed for safety, tucked the blanket around her shoulders. The girl didn't wake. Outside the room, Rowan turned to Iria. "She'll need therapy, education, stability, things you can't give her while working for me." The words landed like verdict. "But you can visit, you can be part of her life, you can show her that protection wasn't a lie." Rowan started walking, expected Iria to follow. They ended up in the same office from before, same desk, same windows overlooking grounds that looked peaceful in moonlight. Rowan poured 2 drinks, amber liquid that smelled expensive. "The Black Meridian lost resources tonight," she said, "but they gained motivation. They'll rebuild. They'll target us systematically. They'll try to break what we're building." She handed Iria a glass. "I need you to stop them. Not alone, but as part of something bigger. Women who understand that power without purpose is just destruction." Iria took the drink. Didn't taste it yet. "What if I fail?" she asked. Rowan smiled. Small, real. "Then you fail protecting someone. That's better than most people manage." She raised her glass. "To calculated mercy, and the women brave enough to enforce it." They drank. Outside, dawn started breaking, light touching darkness, the kind of transition that happened whether anyone was ready or not. Rowan set down her glass. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we start building your team, training, strategy, the skills you'll need to operate in my organization." She moved to the door, paused. "And Iria? Thank you for keeping your promise to Solace, for being exactly what I thought you were." She left. Iria stood alone in the office, thought about the 3 years she'd spent in prison, the letters that had changed everything, the choice that ended one life and started another. Somewhere in this house, a child slept safely. because an alpha had chosen protection over violence. And somewhere in the city, enemies planned retaliation, because female alphas who disrupted the system became targets. Iria finished her drink, felt the burn, felt ready. The war Rowan mentioned wasn't coming. It was already here, and Iria Knox had finally found the side worth fighting for. She walked to the window, watched sunrise paint the world in colors that looked like hope if you squinted right. Tomorrow would bring training, strategy, the machinery of Rowan's organization operating at full capacity. But tonight, Solace was breathing, and that was enough. Iria touched the glass, felt the cold. Made a promise to the girl sleeping upstairs. I'll keep you safe, no matter what it costs, no matter who I have to become. The kind of promise alphas died keeping, the kind worth making anyway. Behind her, footsteps approached, soft, deliberate. Rowan's voice came quiet. One more thing. The woman who leaked our route. We found her. Iria turned. Rowan's expression was cold. Final. Your first assignment, tomorrow. She talks to whoever she's working for. You make sure she never talks again. Not a request, an order. The first test of loyalty in an organization built on discipline and blood. Iria met Rowan's eyes, saw the future waiting there, understood what she'd truly agreed to, and nodded. Because some choices couldn't be undone, and some promises required becoming the monster you swore you'd never be. Did you feel the power of protection and sacrifice? What would you have done in Iria's place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and inspire others with your perspective. This story proves that real strength isn't about violence. It's about choosing who deserves your loyalty. If this moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what courage really means. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Rowan's empire faces its greatest threat. Hit that subscribe button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and let's build a community that believes protection matters more than power. See you in the next story.